Hello, friends, and welcome to another R&R matinee. I don't do enough stuff about amplifiers. So here's a Fender Princeton 68 reissue. It uses two 6v6 valves on the power side, so it gives you 15 watts of pure Fender power. Now, I'm under here under false pretenses. I'm not talking so much about an amp, although I am kind of talking about an amp. I wanted to use this opportunity to give you a rough idea of why it can cost quite a lot of money just to service and look after an amp. So when this amp came in, it wasn't sounding so good. Long story short, the power valves were microphonic. It was a pretty easy spot. You give them a little bit of a tap, and if it sounds like it's humming, if it sounds slightly microphone-ish, then they are microphonic. And then what can happen with microphonic valves is, especially in a combo, because they're sitting so close to the speaker, you start to get a little bit of a feedback loop happening. So when that comes, you can try the fancy tube rings, these rubber things that sort of sit on the glass. I won't say what they look like if you're into the XXX world, but yeah, they're essentially those sorts of things. A little rubber ring goes around the valve, and I don't really know how much difference that makes, because essentially what's happening inside the valve is the electrodes, the whole sort of makeup of the thing is not quite firmly set in place. It's kind of rattling a little bit, and when it does that, it behaves a little bit like a microphone, hence microphonic. So, how do you fix that? You change the valves. Okay, so this amp will probably end up costing in a roughly about 60 quid, maybe a little bit more, who knows. And first of all, someone's going to go, 60 quid to change valves? What? First off the bat, a pair of valves is 30 quid, so you're looking at 30 quid labor. Okay, an hour and a half? I charge 20 quid an hour. Right? So, an hour and a half to change valves? There's more to it than that. You don't just shove them in and then cross your fingers. Or maybe you do. I don't. This particular valve is grid biased, which means there is an adjustment to be made to adjust the negative grid voltage going to pin 5 of the power valves. Now, you know, you can look at the schematic maybe and say, like, set this voltage to a certain amount. It could be in the minus 40s. But that's not going to tell you exactly what's happening. What you need to do is you need to measure the current flow of the anodes or the plates of the 6v6s. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, you could unplug the output transformer lugs, and you could measure the current directly. You could use what's called the shunt method, where you just set your digital multimeter in amps mode to measure the current. I don't do that. I don't like setting the multimeter in current mode, because I've had a few situations where I forgot to switch the leads back to what they were, and poof, things went bad. So the method I use is to measure the voltage drop across the output transformer primary legs, if you want to call it. And if that all sounds like it's above your head, well, I'm not going to explain it anymore, because that's exactly what I'm doing, but it gives you a rough idea into the kinds of things that are involved in biasing an amplifier. There are several different methods. Some people will use a scope to look at, I think, crossover distortion. Is that the way to do it? I don't know. I tend to stick with a static DC flow in the power valves, and I use some maths. You use Ohm's law. You use, you know, V equals IR or P equals IV, and you sort of you measure what's happening. Certain amount of voltage drop across the legs will give you the current, and the current multiplied by the plate voltage, which will change when you change the grid voltage. So all those sorts of dynamic things are in play. So when you're biasing an amp, you're not simply putting a multimeter to one pin and go 42 volts. Schematic says 42, must be biased. I mean, yeah, it could be, but this way, the way I do it, you get some semblance of power dissipation per valve, because you want them to, you know, be, it's a, oh God, I'm digressing horribly, aren't I? It's a push-pull system, and a bit like, you know, whether it was a V2 or a V4 engine in a car, you kind of want everything to be nicely balanced. Otherwise, things are going to be off kilter. The engine's going to be firing off, and it's going to be horrible, right? So that's another way of making sure that the amp is all good. You want to measure current flow per side, and if it's wildly out, for a start, you're going to get a hum. Secondly, it's not going to sound all that nice, even if you're not hearing the hum, because your signal is going to be, slightly imbalanced. So this is also why we use matched valves. Now, just because you get a packet that says, these have been brilliantly matched, well, it depends on the tolerances of the machine that they use. Some companies will have tighter tolerances than others, and other companies just sort of let them go. So you can really tell when you're going in for to buy as an amp what the valves are really doing in situ in this particular amplifier. So I put in a pair of JJ valves. I like using JJ because they're a company that manufacture their own valves, so the data that you get from those valves come from that company, as opposed to, say, Electro Harmonics, which I don't think you can find data on their valves, which tells me they don't make the valves, they simply stamp them. So I'm sure they're fine, yeah, great, but there's a bit of a chain missing there. You're not exactly sure where your valves are coming from, so that's why I use JJ. There are other companies out there that JJ aren't the greatest valves in the world. They're better than others. Some will be even better than JJ's, fine. Why am I telling you all this? Because you're the guy that said, 60 quid to change valves! Okay, you may not have said that, but somebody's gonna say that. Now, I'm not blowing my own horn, but I know all that stuff. So if you're thinking, 60 quid to change a valve, it's gonna explode like gammon, what you need to know is that the person you're paying that amount of money knows what they're doing, right? So if you don't know what you're doing, give it to someone like me and pay through the nose. Yes, you're gonna pay a lot of money. It's a valve amp. It's kind of like buying a car. It always needs some maintenance at some point. There's never been a year that you had a car where you didn't have to pay a service or something. Now granted, I don't know how much this particular amp cost. It's probably in, 5, 6, 7, 800. I don't know. It's a good price, but that doesn't mean you're never going to have to buy anything for it again. Get that out of your head if that's what you're thinking. You're always going to have to maintain an amp, whether it needs new valves. Eventually it'll need new capacitors way down the line. If you buy it when you're young, chances are by the time you're old, you'll need that. If you buy something like this and you're already 70, you'll never need to recap it. Somebody else will have to do it. What else is happening with this amp? That was it. That really was all it was. But even then, when I did change the valves, something wasn't right. I think there was some dust in the sockets. There were some startup crackles. Didn't like it. Blew it out with an air compressor and with some handy dandy contact cleaner just to get like that sort of pressure hose liquid stuff to get any loose particles, dust, old aluminium shavings from the old pins, anything off the new connections that you're making with the new valves. All that stuff needs to be taken care of when you're changing valves. So, like I said before, I'm not going to do the voice again. If you think that paying that amount of money for, getting valves changed is way too much, well, you finish that sentence, I won't. So that's pretty much it about that amp. It is biased. I did, I wanted to get 6.56 watts per side. I think I got 6.5 watts. There's my math. It's on a post-it note, and I'll throw it in the bin when I'm finished. Yeah, that's a Fender Princeton reissue, and why it can cost some money to have seemingly simple things done to it. Addendum, stop everything, an addendum! You may remember this. You remember me from about 10 seconds ago. I had to add a couple of things regarding the amp, and I thought they were good to know in terms of why you would pay 60 and all that for a simple repair. Well, part of that would be that, believe it or not, I may not look it or sound it, but I am officially a competent person, and by that it means that I can then distribute quite legally and within safety codes the precious green sticker. Can you say that? Can you say sticker? It means that the amplifier will pass or fail for electrical safety. Now this you will need when you're, if you're playing at the BBC or certain, city council events, they might want you to have your gear, what they call it PAT testing. That's like saying PIN number. PAT stands for a portable appliance test. And it just means basically that whatever gear you're using is safe to use, and it's not, something that hasn't been, checked over in a little while. Think of it like an MOT, again, going on the car theme of things. So there was that. Now, yeah, and also remember how we laughed, that guy that was like 60 quid. Okay, so I wanted to make absolutely certain that you know that was not the owner of the amp. The owner, the player, he's quite happy with me to just take care of the repairs and do that, and he likes the amp, etc., etc. So he's not that guy. No, that guy was you, because you. Well, no, not you, but yeah, you. Yeah, I don't like you, but so that's you. But the rest of you are okay for the most part. But yeah, that's really what all I wanted to say on that. I think for an addendum.